Good evening all, and welcome. Have you ever felt uncomfortable at work? Someone staring at you from across the desk dividers? Maybe. You never know who might be watching your little cubicle. It can be a dark thing indeed. Before we start the video, I would really appreciate it if you followed me on Twitter and Instagram. Links in the description. Please, it would mean a lot, and it will be worth your while soon enough. But for now, get comfortable. Make sure Barry isn't watching you, and let the darkness take control. I'm a guy in my mid-20s, living in the US. This happened a few months ago, and I'd like to share it now. About a year ago, I decided to quit my corporate job of several years. Long story short, I was absolutely miserable, and I needed a serious change. So I dipped into my savings, packed up only my most necessary belongings, and moved from my hometown on the East Coast to another city some 2,000 miles away. An impulsive decision for sure, but one I don't regret. My first month, I spluttered through a series of odd jobs, casually drifting from one gig to another as I tried to figure out what I really wanted out of life. Eventually, an acquaintance suggested I try bartending. At the time, I had no experience at all, but I thought, screw it, why not put myself out there? It couldn't hurt. I'm gay, and I applied to all the LGBT bars in town. I figured that a job at one of these places would be a good way to integrate myself into the community, maybe even meet some guys without having to resort to Grindr and the like. I quickly hit it off with the owner of the neighborhood pub, and he hired me on the spot, promising to mentor me in all things booze-related. The following months were some of the best of my life. I met a lot of good people and gained a lot of perspective. I'm now starting grad school, but I still work at the same bar a couple of nights a week. That's where the following incident occurred a few months ago. I should mention that this bar is on the corner of a main road and a quiet side street. Around 4:45 p.m., I parked my car halfway down the side street, which at the time was lined with cars, and I walked back to the pub. After taking some deep breaths and doing some quick mental prep, despite the nature of the job, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool introvert, and I walked through the front door, tossed my car keys into my knapsack, and put my knapsack over the main bar. It's my routine, it's what I always do. Only bartenders are ever allowed behind the bar, and I've never felt I needed to lock my personal belongings in the back office. It's just not that kind of place. Almost all of the patrons are quality people, hard workers, community members, younger, older, and everything in between. People who generally deserve a break every now and then, if only in the form of a cocktail or three. That being said, it's not cheers. Admittedly, this job has made me wise to what so many women must have to endure on a regular basis. Not everyone is respectful of personal boundaries, especially when you're fresh, new meat. I've been leered at, and I've had guys reach out to me and run their hands through my hair, stroke my chest and squeeze things, forcefully pull me closer and whisper me all the things they'd like to do to me, only to get righteous and angry when I don't enthusiastically reciprocate. My first week, my boss told me half-jokingly, "This is a gay bar, there's no such thing as harassment." I guess because they're dudes and I'm a dude and we're all dudes, I'm supposed to man up and deal with it, which for the most part I did. The money's consistently good, but I still can't say that I'm entirely comfortable with it. Double standards suck. Anyway, Monday evening can be hit or miss. That one Monday was a miss. By the time 10 p.m. rolled around, only a couple of folks remained. That's when Vern walked in. I'd guessed that Vern was in his mid to late 30s, solid build, clean shaven, average looking, sort of impeccably anonymous. I'd never seen him before. He sat down at the end of the counter on the very last stall, next to where I enter and exit from behind the bar, and where I usually leave my belongings. He ordered a soda and introduced himself, and we made small talk for a few minutes. He seemed to be a pretty affable guy, and nothing about him seemed explicitly out the ordinary, but admittedly something about him didn't sit quite right with me. He almost seemed a little too ordinary, like conspicuously so. He was dressed up as dressed down, if that makes any sense. It's hard to describe. Think along the lines of someone who might spend an hour trying to style the perfect bedhead. Anyway, at some point the topic got around to video games, which I love, and then for a good 10 minutes we discussed some upcoming releases we were both apparently excited about. Eventually, I had to excuse myself to help another customer, as well as finish a couple of other tasks that still need doing. But Vern said it was no big deal, and of course I needed to do my job. Cool, no problem. As I walked around the pub cleaning this and that, I couldn't help but notice that whenever I happened to look in Vern's direction, he was already staring at me. This is something I've gotten used to as a bartender, but again, something in particular just didn't sit quite right. Sometimes he would look away, but most of the time he wouldn't give me any tiny impenetrable smile. This went on for a while, nearly 2 hours. I'd walk up to him occasionally, ask him if he needed anything, and we'd have a brief exchange and I'd go back to my other duties. He just kept on staring, so on and so on. In all that time, he only ordered one more soda, and he didn't talk to anyone else. He had his smartphone on the counter in front of him, but I never saw him once look at it. As I said before, I've experienced worse, so I figured that he was probably socially awkward or maybe just lonely. Whatever he wasn't particularly subtle. By midnight, Vern was the only person sitting at the bar. There were 2 guys playing pool in the back room and out of sight, and a few guys smoking on the patio. But Vern and I were the only ones in the main room. In that sort of situation, I'd feel rude to not chat up the only person left in the vicinity. It's part of my job to make people feel welcome after all. But despite it being a super slow night, I felt drained and just couldn't find the energy to strike up a genuine conversation with someone who was making me feel like I was on full display. I figured it would be a good time to go to the storeroom and grab a few cases of beer that I had to restock soon anyway. I excused myself and told Vern I was going to the office and would be right back. When I made it inside the office, I immediately felt a sense of relief, like I'd finally made it backstage after a gruelingly long performance. It took me about 30 seconds to grab the stuff I needed, but I decided to sit down and mess around on my phone for a few minutes, enjoying my solitude. I stayed there until I felt like I'd been away from my post for a bit too long, at which point I headed upstairs to the bar. To my surprise, Vern was gone by the time I got back, and there was a $20 bill under his glass. I felt suddenly guilty, not because I'd just made money off him, though of course that was appreciated, but because maybe he really was just some closeted dude who didn't know how to interact with other guys. And maybe the money was his only reliable way of expressing gratitude for the company. Maybe I had misread the cues and was projecting my own insecurities onto his admittedly awkward behavior. In any case, he was gone now, and I still had more to do, so I placed the cash in my tip jar and mentally thanked him for it, and I began going about my tasks for the rest of the shift and quickly put Vern out my head. A few hours later, around 1 a.m., I escorted the final stragglers outside and closed the front door. I work alone on Monday nights, so it usually takes me a little less than an hour to finish my tasks after closing. As per usual, I put on some chill music and went on autopilot. At 2 a.m., everything was done, and after turning off the last few lights, I grabbed my knapsack, set the alarm and headed out the front door, which locks on its own. I started to amble down the street towards my car, the only one left on the block, and all I could think about was how badly I needed to pack a bowl and jump in the shower. When I reached the back door of my car, I absent-mindedly yanked it open and threw my knapsack in the back seat, slamming the door closed, and stepped up to the driver's side door and pulled the handle and climbed inside. Only as my ass made contact with the seat, and I reached my hands towards the open door, did I realize I hadn't taken my car keys out my bag. I never actually unlocked my car. A wave rolled over me like I had jumped into the ocean and saw something in the periphery of my vision, and I kid you not, He was there, just sitting in my passenger seat. I'm not ashamed to admit that I screamed. The driver's side door was still wide open, but I couldn't move. I just stared at him, dumbfounded. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," Vern said. I didn't immediately respond, so he quickly followed up with, "I thought we could hang out. Maybe play some games together." Then, like it was nothing, he handed me my car keys, which he had obviously stolen out my bag during those minutes I was in the office, and apologized again, presumably for having my keys in the first place. Then he offhandedly gave me an address and said that he didn't live far and if I was interested. I'd like to say that I was this close to grabbing him by the collar and beating the crap out of him, but something in my gut urged me strongly to play along and pretend like this situation wasn't completely insane. The street was deserted. I had no idea if he was armed and how unhinged he was. There were too many variables. "No worries, man," I said, like he was an old childhood friend who'd just flown into town to surprise me on my birthday. "Just wasn't expecting to see you." I had no idea what I should say. It might have been a stupid decision on my part, and there were probably 1,001 things I should have done instead. But I tried to genuinely meet him halfway and just be as gracious as possible, as calm as possible. "That sounds cool, but it's a long night for me, and I'm really tired. Can we rain check?" A few silent moments passed, but I supposed I sounded genuine enough because he crossed his arms and simply said, "Okay." I asked him if he had his car parked nearby and he said no. I didn't press the issue further, and I told him outright that I'd be happy to drop him off at his place, at which point we could trade numbers and make plans in the morning after I'd gotten some sleep. Somehow, appeasement seemed safer than flat-out confrontation or running away. I didn't want to offend him or make him feel like he was in the wrong. I had no idea what he was capable of, whether he was actually malevolent or just an alien from another social dimension. He quietly agreed to the ride, and it was the longest 10 minutes of my life. On the way, I asked him about how his day went, which games he liked, and other random stuff. I mentioned multiple times that I was really glad to meet another gamer, and that it'd be fun to share the hobby with someone else. Just basically whatever it took to keep the conversation light and flowing. But he didn't say much aside from occasionally directing me to turn left or right, and whatever he did say had a sort of petulant tone to it. I felt like I was driving home a psychotic toddler who had just refused McDonald's. He looked out the passenger window the entire ride. Occasionally I would glance over to him, but mostly I tried to keep my eyes forward because I found that focusing on the road made me feel more centered. Of course, a part of me now wishes I had acted more assertively, whipping around a sharp turnaround and sending him flying effortlessly out the window. You know, something badass. But being friendly and accommodating was really the only thing that seemed to be appropriate at the time. My grandfather says, kill him with kindness, and I disagree. That's always the correct solution. But it's what I did that night, and it worked. I considered driving directly to a police station, but I wasn't terribly familiar with the neighborhood, and I didn't want to rile him up by taking out my phone. Before long, we arrived. The destination was a small park in a suburb that I'd only driven through a few times. He said he'd walk the rest of the way, and at his request, I brought the car to a stop on the corner. There was a short, somewhat terrifying lull before either of us said anything or made any sort of move. I offered to put my number in his phone, but he refused and simply said thanks and got out the car. As soon as he closed the door, I hightailed it down the street and drove aimlessly for about a mile before I pulled over and just idled on the side of a main road. I sat in silence for a few moments and then called my boss, who at this point is a good friend. Honestly, I didn't care it was after 2 a.m. He answered after a few rings and I quickly regurgitated everything that had happened. He was a good sport about it and didn't just play it off for laughs, instead expressing legitimate concern. We had a mandatory staff meeting in the morning, which everyone was told they needed to be on guard, and how the bar would be installing several cameras for extra security. Thankfully, I haven't seen Vern again since that night, nor have any of the other bartenders. So Vern, let's not meet, at my bar or anywhere else, I have bear spray now. I was 16 at the time, working as a shift manager at a frozen yogurt place. I typically would close up shop alone. Don't ask why, the owner thought it would be a good idea for a 16-year-old girl to close a yogurt store alone at 10 p.m. and handled all of the closing work, counting registers, separating tips, and cleaning up. 20 minutes before closing time, alone in this shop, a man walked in and immediately gave me a creepy vibe. He was dressed in dark clothing, didn't make any eye contact, and didn't say a word to me. He paced around the shop for what seemed like hours, when realistically it was only a minute or so. We had an emergency button on our register that we were instructed to push in the event of a robbery or emergency situation. To me, as a 16-year-old girl alone in a frozen yogurt shop with a man pacing around inside in silence, in dark clothing around closing time, this constituted an emergency situation, so I pressed the button. Immediately after pressing it, I asked the man if he needed something, to which point he said, "No." I was preparing at any point for him to pull out some sort of weapon, but thankfully he began to leave as law enforcement was pulling up. Just as he walked outside, law enforcement were exiting their vehicles and he took off running. They nabbed him, questioned him, and placed him into custody. Long story short, as I was just told by the deputies, he had just finished robbing the subway next door about 30 minutes before he came into my shop. They were uncertain whether or not it was his intention to rob me as well, but thankfully, because of the swift action of the law enforcement and them already being in the area because of the previous robbery next door, that didn't happen. So to the creepy guy pacing in my yogurt shop at closing time, I hope to never meet again. I'm almost 30 and am female, and have been told I look 16 to 18 depending on the outfit. I have an anxiety disorder, and additionally I have issues picking up social cues, so sometimes I misunderstand things or get paranoid about things that are really innocent, so I've learned to question my thoughts. I've been working in the food service industry for a few years, and in particular about 2 years at the place I'm in now. This incident happened a year ago. I had just started working some late night shifts, and we hired a new manager, Peter. He was a foot or so taller than me, skinny with dark eyes and large glasses. He wasn't physically imposing, but still made me nervous because he was new. There are reasons new males put me on edge, but that is a story for another day. After a few days, I noticed some odd things about him. Whenever I worked the counter, he would stand so close behind me that I could feel the cloth of his shirt brush my back, because he was looking over my shoulder. I worked here before he did, and had for at least a year, so it bugged me. If I was stuck in the drive-thru area instead, he would stand in a way that I was blocked in and couldn't get past him. And every time I bent over, it looked like he was staring at my butt. At first, I figured I was just imagining it, that he wasn't purposefully blocking me in. Surely I was just being paranoid. After a few more weeks of working there, he started buying pizza for the crew or drinks from nearby businesses, and he was always the one to go pick it up and bring it in. I wouldn't eat anything unless the rest of the crew did, and never drank anything I didn't get for myself, nor did I leave anything in the back office just in case. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Well, one night I was told I had to do a late night shift, just me, Peter, and Jack, someone who had worked there a long time, and I trust him implicitly. Before the others left, I asked Jack to please keep an eye on Peter because he scared me. That night, Peter asked me to clean the bathrooms, and I had no choice but to agree. To illustrate the layout of the building, in order to get to the bathrooms from the main office, you go to the kitchen, around the corner, through a doorway into the entryway, and from there you open the men's room door, and from there is a back wall stall with the door that I was in. So I'm there in the main men's stall, and Jack is in the kitchen, as far as I know, with Peter in the office. As my back is turned, I hear the propped open men's room door shut. I turn around, blocking my exit to the men's stall, and there's Peter. Immediately I panic because that means 3 closed doors between me and Jack. Peter holds up a pair of drive-through headgear and makes a comment like, "So I found these new ones in the office. You want to use them? I probably shouldn't give them to you, but I like you, so I figured why not." I declined, and honestly I was shaking out my shoes. Innocent as the dialogue was, he was looking at me up and down the whole time, and it just felt creepy. He stood there about a foot away and just stared at me, not saying anything. And after a minute or so, Jack came in and said there was a phone call, and Peter had to come and get it. Naturally, I booked it out that bathroom and stuck myself to Jack, explaining that I was really scared and felt uncomfortable with the way Peter looked at me, and the odd way he was behaving. Well, to me it was odd anyway, but again, I felt like I was probably paranoid. He told me he wouldn't let me out of his sight for the rest of the night, and he kept good on his word. A few hours later, Peter says he's grabbing a pizza and some soda from the place I mentioned earlier. When he came back, he called me to the back office and offered me a glass of soda, pre-poured, and I respectfully declined, thinking to myself that I was being stupidly over-paranoid. But then again, why did he always bring soda when we had 100 kinds on premises? He asked me another 2 to 3 times if I was sure, and I again declined. Jack right beside me. Then Peter asked me if I had a boyfriend. I did, but lied and said fiancé, because I figured it would maybe dissuade any potential flirting. Fiancé? Aren't you a little young for that? I don't know why I told him my age. He just kind of sat there and looked me up and down really slowly, and he said, "Oh, I thought you were 16 or 17. From there, he left me pretty much alone. About 3 days later, he was arrested because the place he worked before, he had apparently inappropriately touched an underage female co-worker and threatened them and told them he was a cop and so on, and would arrest them if he ever told anyone. He was eventually transferred from where we worked, and we were never told anything until his arrest. He's come by twice since then, even though he's not allowed on property because we have minors on site. I'm still freaked out, especially because the last time he came around, it was the drive-thru where I was standing. So Peter, let's not meet again." I work at a golf course. I work behind the food counter. There's only one girl that works behind the food counter at a time. There is me and 6 other girls that work there. That's it. The rest are all men. Most of the older men have made attempts to hit on me, and they're jokes, but they never say anything bad. Nothing outside of, "You're so pretty," or anything like that. One guy, however, has stuck out. I started working there this past May, and this one older guy, probably mid-60s, knows my aunt, so we kind of got along. A few months passed without an incident. He friended me on Facebook, and I didn't think twice about it. Then he made some weird comments to me. Okay, first off, he started talking about his daughter's ass. Then he said, "You have a small one compared to hers." Twice. And I was like, okay. And since then, I haven't turned my back to him. I posted a picture on Facebook with one of my friends. We were at the water park and in bikinis. That guy came into work next day asking about her. "Who's the other girl in the bikini with you?" And he asked her name and how I met her. I refused to give out any real information. Then, not long after, he started asking questions about relationships I've been in, like how long they lasted and how old I was. One night he even followed me to my car. It was pretty dark out, a little after 9 p.m, and I parked pretty far away. I carry a taser, so I had it in my hands as I was walking. There's a bar across the street, and we allow people to park in our parking lot when there's no parking left in the bar. I was around 5 to 10 feet away from my car when I heard someone say, "Hey," right behind me. I whirl around, taser in hand, and he started asking all these questions about my car. My car did have some issues a few months back, but they've all been fixed. I also told him that. He walked over to my driver's side and started looking where I used to have a dent. I got it in an accident and had a dent in the winter, and basically said my car is fine, I'm leaving, and jumped in my car and sped off. I got so fed up, I told some of the other workers and my supervisor. I found out customers have been complaining about him, and he sometimes harasses the women that visit here. Most of the other workers don't like him, especially the girls at the counter. He takes golf balls too. The season just somewhat ended, and I've heard a rumor that he won't be returning. Let's just hope, for everyone's sake, this rumor turns out to be true. I'm a 21-year-old female, about 5'6" with glasses and blonde hair. I work at a hotel doing housekeeping, and used to work the food area serving breakfast and dinner, but I switched to the back of the house about 3 months after starting. This story starts when I was still working up front doing food service. I come in for my normal shift as the dinner attendant and started to make the food. While I'm working, my assistant general manager walks in, called Pam, holding a piece of paper. "You have a secret admirer. Someone named Bill the taco boy left it. He gave you his number." I look at her confused and ask, "Why?" "It was given to the manager on duty last night, and they asked them to give it to the tall girl with the blonde hair and glasses apparently." So I take the paper, threw it away because I had no idea who Bill the Taco Bell boy was, and continued on with my shift as normal, and go home. The next day I come in to be the breakfast attendant, and the MOD that had gotten Bill's number was there, so I asked him about it. "Oh yeah, he didn't even get your name. The only reason I knew he was talking about you is because he described you." Then I asked her what he looked like, trying to figure out if I had spoken to him before. He was probably around 50, had glasses, was short, stocky, and smelled of alcohol. My first thought is, great, another creep. I tell her I'd never seen this man in my life, and she goes on to tell me he had checked out and I should be okay. Fast forward about a month and I've switched to housekeeping. The entryway to our rooms has a tile since it's connected to the bathroom area, and when we wipe them down, we usually do it on our hands and knees. One day I was wiping down my bathroom/entry floorway, minding my own business, listening to My 600-Pound Life, when I feel eyes searing into me. I had my back to the door, so I turn around to see if someone was there. There's this man, about 50, stocky with glasses. At this point I had totally forgotten about the bill situation and didn't think anything of it. "Hi, was there something I could help you with?" I ask in my customer service voice and a huge smile, standing up so I could actually talk to him instead of being crouched on the floor. "You never texted or called me," he replied. "What?" I asked, genuinely confused. He looked at me in the most serious face and asked, "You don't remember? I'm Bill. I left you my number hoping you could get hold of me." Everything comes back to me now, and I'm kind of shocked and don't know what to say. "I'm sorry, we aren't allowed to talk to our guests outside of work. It's company policy." "Then why didn't your manager say I couldn't give you my number?" I had absolutely no idea what to say back to this, so I made up some answer to try to get him away from me. "She's new and must not have realized. I'm sorry. Is there anything I could do for you though?" I ask, now realizing he's literally standing in the doorway of the room. "No. Just know I'll never forget about you and that little arse as you wipe down the floor." And with that he walked away. Luckily I haven't seen this man again, but now I have a Swiffer that I put my rag on to clean our tile. I have no idea what would have happened if I'd have actually texted this man, but thank God I threw his number away. And also that he didn't try anything when he absolutely could have. I'm a female aged 20. I've been working for a well-known chain of convenience stores situated mainly on the eastern states of the US. I've been doing this for a little over a year. Since the stores are popular, we get a fair amount of traffic, and in working with the public, you obviously get a few creeps. The first time I had an encounter was actually the day I was interviewed and hired. As I was coming out of the store and celebrating in my head because I had just gotten the first job I'd ever had, I spotted a man. He looked to be in his mid-40s, heavy set, and I immediately got a creepy vibe from him. As I was waiting for my ride, he was staring and eventually spoke to me. "Do you have a boyfriend?" "No," I stupidly replied. "Well, do you want one?" While smiling at me, as if I were a meal and he was starving. I was about to book it back to the store when my ride finally pulled up and I practically threw myself into the car and told them to floor it. My second encounter when I was actually working, and was quite recent, perhaps a month or two ago. At this point I've been working for over a year and have a pretty good handle on how to deal with customers. I've been hit on before, asked out, had guys persistently asked for my number, so I'm no stranger to saying, "No thank you." But this guy took it to a new level. First thing that weirded me out was that he had apparently been at the store, standing outside by the trash can, since first shift, which goes from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. And it was now second shift, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., which is the shift I work the most, and he was still there. He looked to be around 35 to 40-ish, and even I would have had trouble standing in the same place for so long, at around half his age. So I didn't really know what to make of it, other than assume he was probably homeless and waiting for someone to give him their change or buy him food. Until I found out he was actually giving out money, mainly $1 bills and assorted change. This struck me as kind of odd, but I figured maybe he was just trying to make people happy. Then he walked into the store and was chatting at me as I was ringing him up, which isn't in itself unusual. Some customers will chat your ears off, others will hardly say 2 words because they just want to get in and out, and I'm fine either way. Then he starts talking about how I'm so pretty, calling me beautiful and the like. I have pretty low self-esteem, so at first I kind of appreciated the compliment, but he was saying the same thing for a good 5 minutes, and I'm not the only female working here, yet he's focused on me. He finally exits, but I can see him lurking outside. I do my best to ignore him, but he eventually enters the store again. Someone buys him lunch, and he hangs around chatting at me. Only this time it's insistently pestering me for my number and saying, "Why not? I'm a nice guy. I'll treat you well," when I politely refuse multiple times. He also offered me a bottle of Coke rather randomly. I don't even take unopened drinks from friends, let alone strangers, so I again refused, with a bit more steel in my voice. At this point I was a bit worried about what he might do when my shift was over. Was he going to try and follow me home? Thankfully, my manager, after me sending him numerous help me looks, stepped in and kindly asked him to leave, saying we couldn't have someone loitering around the store. He finally left after that, and I haven't seen him since, but it seriously freaked me out. I'd like to hope he was a nice guy, but you never know. I work in an office in the Midwest. We have some cameras that are being set up. The whole setup is mainly in my office. This guy is one of those middle-aged men who likes to make a show out of everything, tossing used cables in the trash with a weird motion, trying very hard to get me to talk to him by making comments about what he's doing and the weather. He talks really loud on the phone, looking over to me and just smiling. I don't really engage because I don't want to. He's twice my age, and I'm 26. He then starts talking about his daughter. "Oh, you look so much like my daughter. She's older and lives with my ex-wife. You two could pass as sisters." Then he starts asking more direct questions, so I'm giving short answers. I'm not really being impolite, but I'm busy with work. "Do you live round here? How do you like it? Do you like the job? I bet someone as pretty as you has a boyfriend. I wish I had a pretty girl like you to keep me company. Is your boyfriend older than you? Do you like older men?" So now I'm creeped out because he's already told me I look like his underage daughter, and now he's flirting with me, leaning on my desk and asking what's the oldest guy I've ever been with. I told my boss, and she's just like, "He's making conversation." But it really wouldn't be a story if it just ended like that, and I wouldn't waste my time telling you all of this. The weirdo sends me a message on Facebook, asking if I wanted to hang out sometime, saying, "I know you can't really talk since you're at work, so let's go out." I go by a shortened name than what's on my Facebook, but my business cards have my full name, which means he had to take my card to find me on social media. My manager is taking this seriously and called to tell the company we want another man to work on our equipment. Thankfully, I don't work there anymore. In my youth in the 1980s, I had got my first job at a hotel in our town. It was a 3-minute walk from my house and was incredibly convenient. The manager who I had at the time was called Bruce, and he seemed very friendly. He was the kind of person that was very easy to work with. He wasn't overbearing, difficult, and just let you get on with everything. He'd occasionally come in to check, of course, as managers should, but for the most part would hardly ever complain, and was happy with the job well done. I always got on well with him, despite the fact that we didn't speak often. To understand this story better, I need to explain that this hotel was rather large. It was a 13-story hotel and had a vast amount of rooms. The exact amount I can't remember. Well, this is when things got a bit weird. Bruce came into work one day and started acting a bit funny. He didn't check any of our jobs and just hid in the staff room and his office, trying to avoid anyone and everything. He looked really troubled, and one of our co-workers went in to ask him what was wrong, and he gave them a very jittery response, saying that he just wasn't feeling well, and she asked why he didn't go home. He said it was a great idea, and left. He hadn't come in for a week, he hadn't called any of the other managers, and we were starting to get concerned. When they finally went to his house to see if he was okay, he came out and said he really wasn't feeling good, and that he'd probably be out of work for another few weeks. This was odd, but because everyone liked Bruce, I suppose the managers higher up tolerated it, because when he returned, everything was fine. He was back to his old self. And for the longest time, we just assumed this was a blip. I had been working at the hotel for over 1.5 years now, and this weird Bruce incident had kind of been forgotten. When out of nowhere, it resurfaced. He came into work again in a really foul mood and just stayed in his office. After a few days of the same, he confined himself to his house. And as this was now the second time, people were starting to worry if there were some underlying issues underneath the facade of Bruce's bubbly nature and well-to-do character. After another inspection and Bruce coming back to work a few days later, everything seemed to be coming to normal. That is, of course, until the police came by when he wasn't working shift. They brought us a picture of Bruce and asked if he worked here, to which one of our staff team said he did. The police officer looked at them triumphantly and asked a bit more about their shift. He said that Bruce would be in tonight, around 6, and that if he wanted to speak to him, that's when he'd have to come, as he couldn't give out his address. I'm not sure if the police officer asked, but whatever. In any case, I was at work that time, and just as I had come downstairs to replenish some cleaning supplies, did I see Bruce talking with one of the police officers. His face was a ghostly white, super pale, and the most scared I think I'd ever seen him. They told him that he would need to come with them, and he begrudgingly got into the cop car, and we saw him no more. The next day, it came out that Bruce had been doing some shady activities, the likes of which I don't want to mention, but let's just say they were unsavory in nature and quite illegal. He had been caught, but was going to be put to trial. He managed to get out on bail and obviously wasn't going to come back to work. I'm not sure of the formalities of the situation, but I think he was probably fired when everyone found out what he'd done. It was pretty sickening. But that's not where the story ends. I was working, and it was around midnight. I was just preparing to leave when Bruce came in. I look at him, and I say, "Bruce, you're not supposed to be here." He ignores me and goes to the elevator and summons it to the top floor. Now, it's important to note that we had these old-style elevators in the building. He rose to the top floor, sent it down, and then opened the elevator door. He plummeted down the shaft and crashed to the bottom. I never actually heard any of this. The sound must have been quite resonating. But when all the commotion was happening around me, did I go and find out, and someone eventually clocked that something terrible had happened. It wasn't before long that the police and ambulance came, and it was too late. He was gone. Let me tell you, it is no easy thing to retrieve a body from an elevator shaft, especially not when that body is in several pieces. I can't remember how long the elevator was closed off for, but it took a long time and a lot of money to get it working again. We might as well have just put a new one in, I think. In any case, that's not the end of the story. A few years later, I left my job at my hometown, got married, and moved abroad. It wasn't for many, many years that I had a reason to go back to that hotel. My parents were finally selling the old place and moving into a retirement village to live out their golden days that was fairly near to our home in my new country of residence. So I was very excited. Unfortunately, they were gutting a lot of the place in order to make it sellable, as the buyer wanted it completely unfurnished and empty, as they had big plans to remodel it. My parents obliged and were helping with the whole process. So we were all staying at this hotel, which, as I said, was very close to that house. I stayed there about a week, and just before going to bed I heard weird noises coming from the elevator. I thought it was strange. And then one evening, I asked one of the members of the front desk if anything strange had happened in the hotel lately. I hadn't mentioned that I used to work here years ago, but the girl behind the counter was kind enough to tell me that, even though I may not believe it, there have been numerous reports of a figure wandering around the corridors and mostly in the elevator. I asked if he was a stocky, tall man, quite strong, and she said, "That's what I've been led to believe." I then told her about my experience when I worked there and about my manager who had taken his own life in that way. She was horrified. I'm not sure if this is the reason the hotel is haunted, but if it is, Bruce hasn't found his peace, and after what he did, I don't think he ever will. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Yes, I'm not shutting up about the Twitter or Instagram plea. Seriously, please help me out. Go follow me there. Really, you won't regret it in a bit. A huge thank you, as always, to all my lovely patrons who really do help and support by keep the channel running with their kind donations. To get some cool rewards like the ability to pick your own video, have your name on the end screen, as well as a whole load of other rewards, feel free to check out the link in the description. If there is something spooky or scary that's ever happened to you, you can email it to me or post it on my Reddit. Either are fine, and it could make its way into a video in the near future. Thanks guys. Alright then, but for now I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, check out my Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you in the next one.